Okay, that's as good as it's gonna get tonight. So for today's Kin 225 class, this is what I've got for you. Review of the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain, and then I'm gonna get into more carbohydrate metabolism, specifically glucose transport into muscle. I'm gonna talk a little bit about diabetes and also this concept called the glycemic index. The glycemic index refers to different types of carbohydrate that will result in different rates of glucose appearance in the blood. And theoretically, one type of carbohydrate might be better than another for improving endurance performance. So a few multiple choice questions for you. These are relatively tough ones because they all involve enzymes. Which of the following is an enzyme of the electron transport chain? So out of all those options, your best answer here is C, cytochrome oxidase. So this is a tricky question because I haven't given you this enzyme before, but for this question, it's just a process of elimination. So I've given you pyruvate dehydrogenase. It's an important enzyme for getting pyruvate into the mitochondria. Succinate dehydrogenase and citrate synthase, I've given you those ones before. Those are enzymes of the Krebs cycle. And then the only one we haven't discussed is cytochrome oxidase. It's an enzyme that's important in the electron transport chain. And recall, that's the final metabolic pathway in aerobic metabolism. Which of the following would increase with chronic aerobic training? So your best answer here would be all of the above. And it's all of the above because these are all mitochondrial enzymes. So with aerobic training, your mitochondria increase in size and number, and the enzymes that they contain will also increase. The advantage of that is that it allows you to have faster chemical reactions aerobically, and from an applied perspective, that will allow you to maintain a faster pace during an aerobic type race, so such as a marathon, a 10-kilometer run, or a long distance bike ride. Having higher levels of these enzymes will allow you to maintain a faster pace. Which of the following is an enzyme of the Krebs cycle and is involved in a metabolic reaction where hydrogen is exchanged from one compound to another? The best answer here would be B, your succinate dehydrogenase. So both succinate dehydrogenase and citrate synthase are enzymes of the Krebs cycle, but you can see the name of this enzyme contains dehydrogenase. That implies that it's an enzyme involved in a reaction where you exchange one hydrogen from one molecule to another. In this case, succinate dehydrogenase is involved in one of the steps where NADH is formed in the Krebs cycle. So again, your best answer here is B, succinate dehydrogenase. I'm going to get into different aspects of glucose metabolism. So the first aspect involves glucose transport into the muscle fiber from the blood. So the question here is, how does glucose get into the muscle fiber from the blood? It involves a protein that acts as a glucose transporter. Conveniently is called a glucose transport protein. And the main one in your muscle is called GLUT4. So it just stands for glucose transport protein 4. These GLUT4 proteins migrate from the inside of the muscle to the muscle membrane in response to exercise. And this allows glucose to enter into the muscle. So this diagram schematically shows skeletal muscle, so muscle fiber, your blood with the glucose in it, and then you have these glucose transport proteins that are located inside the muscle fiber. When a muscle contracts, so during exercise, it stimulates these glucose transport proteins to go to the muscle fiber membrane, and that will allow glucose to go into the muscle fiber, and then your glucose can be used as an energy source inside the muscle fiber. You'll notice that of the pool of glucose transport proteins, only a portion of them go to the muscle fiber membrane in response to contraction or exercise. And there's a portion that stay inside the muscle. So those ones aren't reactive to exercise. They're reactive to something else. And they're reactive to the answer to this question. So what hormone that usually allows uptake of glucose into skeletal muscle is lacking in type 1 diabetics? The answer here is insulin. So insulin is a hormone that's produced from your pancreas. So with type 1 diabetics, they have a defect in their pancreas and that they can't release insulin. So they have to take insulin injections. So after a meal, your pancreas releases insulin in response to elevated blood glucose levels. That insulin then can bind to the muscle fiber membrane. That stimulates this pool of glucose transport proteins to go to the muscle fiber membrane, and that allows glucose uptake into the muscle. So this is the normal function of insulin. It allows you to clear blood glucose after a meal by binding to the muscle fiber membrane, stimulating the translocation of those GLUT4 transporters to the muscle membrane, and that allows glucose to be taken up by the muscle. Now, type 1 diabetes involves the lack of production of insulin. Type 2 diabetes is a little bit different. So initially, insulin is still produced, but insulin sensitivity at the muscle is reduced, so insulin is no longer effective. So it's difficult to get glucose into the muscle, and so blood glucose levels will be high in this condition. And if you have high blood glucose levels, that stimulates a further release of insulin from the pancreas. So insulin is released from the pancreas in response to elevated blood glucose levels. So during type 2 diabetes, initially you will have high blood glucose levels and high insulin levels in the blood. And then later in the disease, insulin production decreases because the pancreas gets overworked. So later in type 2 diabetes, type 2 diabetics also have to start taking insulin injections because they'll be lacking that hormone produced by the pancreas. Now, your GLUT4 levels in your muscles increase with endurance training. So endurance training, and actually any type of training, so endurance training, strength training, any type of exercise training is effective for increasing these GLUT4 levels. And this will help you to get glucose into the muscle and help to prevent or alleviate type 2 diabetes because it helps to lower your blood glucose levels. So the key here is that usually low GLUT4 levels in muscle are not the cause of type 2 diabetes, but an increase in physical activity that increases the GLUT4 levels can help to alleviate type 2 diabetes. So it just helps you to clear blood glucose better and get more glucose into the muscle. But there's a question here that I have at the bottom. What population might have very low GLUT4 levels in muscle? And this is due to extreme inactivity. And this might contribute to development of diabetes in this specific population. And the answer here is that it's people that have paralysis, especially in their lower limbs, as caused by spinal cord injury. So people with spinal cord injury and paralysis of lower limbs have a greater susceptibility to development of type 2 diabetes. So there have been developed a couple of exercise techniques for people that have spinal cord injury to help alleviate this condition of type 2 diabetes. And you'll see one of these training ergometers here, or training machines. So this is a cycle ergometer, and if you look closely, you can see the person strapped in. They're receiving electrical stimulus to their gluteus maximus, their quadriceps, and their calf muscles, and that stimulus is rotating from one muscle to another to allow a person to pedal this cycle ergometer. So this person has paralyzed lower limbs, but through electrical stimulation and the sequential electrical stimulation of different muscles, they're able to actually pedal this ergometer and get a decent workout of their lower body muscles. They've also developed a rowing ergometer for people with spinal cord injury. So again, this girl has paralysis in her lower limbs, and you can see this stimulating electrodes are applied to her leg muscles. And again, her leg muscles are going to be sequentially stimulated, and that allows her to get a workout in on this rowing ergometer. So some kind of cool rehabilitation exercise modalities for people with spinal cord injury, just to help them keep their muscles trained and to help prevent or alleviate type 2 diabetes from that reduction in glucose 4 transporters in the muscle. So this graph shows the results of a study that I was involved in at the University of Alberta over 20 years ago. You can see the date at the bottom. But we showed that with 8 weeks of that cycle ergometer training in people with paralyzed muscles, so this is applying electrical stimulation to the muscle to pedal the bicycle, we were able to increase GLUT4 levels in the muscle. You can see the level before training, and then after training, it almost doubled. And that improved their glucose uptake into the muscle to help alleviate this condition of type 2 diabetes. For this next section, I'm going to cover the glycemic index, and I'm going to cover this in the next video.